Before you listen to this week's podcast, the Taxpayers Alliance would like to pay tribute to Peter Whittle, whose death was announced last week. We send our love and condolences to his family, friends, current and former colleagues. Peter joined us on this podcast earlier this year and was a pleasure to listen to. He was a true patriot and was ahead of the curve when it came to understanding and predicting where Britain was heading, both culturally and politically. As well as being the founder and director of the New Culture Forum, he served his time on the political front line as a member of the London Assembly and as a deputy leader of UKIP. A talented author, journalist and broadcaster, his debating skills were second to none, and he was not afraid to champion free speech and challenge those who wished to strip away the basic fundamentals of British culture. Peter was courageous, passionate and a political visionary. He will be much missed.
Taxi!
Where to, mate?
Hello, mate. 55 Tufton Street, please.
55 Tufton Street, SW1. Yep, I know it well. Hop in, sir. This is A Nation of Taxpayers, a weekly podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance.
On this episode of A Nation of Taxpayers, we revisit something that we talked about several months ago, but believe me, this is not about cheap content or just thinking, this is a quick and easy win for this week's episode. We have a lot to talk about when we talk about the BBC. I'm Duncan Barkes, I'm your host. Alongside me from the TPA is Callum McGoldrick. Good to see you.
Great to be back on.
And we welcome back to A Nation of Taxpayers, Rebecca Ryan from Defund The BBC. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming in. I don't know where to start, really, because, there is literally a catalogue of, clear examples of bias, also a massive list of, if you like, scandals that have hit the BBC since you and I last spoke, including some slightly dodgy TV presenters. I think that's probably the fairest way of saying it. But it all kind of culminated a few weeks ago when we had this bloke called Michael Prescott, and I'll do my best to explain it to our listener. Michael Prescott is an ex-journalist, but also he sat on the BBC kind of standards board, didn't he?
Yep.
And he released, or it appears, gave a memo to the Daily Telegraph that he had sent to other members of this committee, highlighting his concerns, but also giving very clear examples of what he saw were cases of bias within the BBC. And it made the Daily Telegraph, and then literally all hell broke loose, and rightly so. And again, just for the purposes of context for our listener, there was a lot of stuff in there. I think the three main takeaways were, in no particular order, we had this allegation from Michael Prescott that he was aware of LGBTQ plus journalists who man the BBC news desk, dealing with those stories, being quite obstructive when it came to talking about stuff that didn't suit their agenda. So anything that perhaps was an issue that they didn't agree with in the trans debate, they were reluctant to cover it. He talked about that. He gave numerous examples of BBC Arabic and how there was biased reporting regarding Israel-Gaza. And the biggie, which even to this day, I personally can't get my head around. And as regular listeners might know, or subscribers to our BBC Watch email, I worked for the BBC for 6 years. And I'll give you my view on this in a second. But this clear bit of doctoring, if you like, of footage of Donald Trump, the most powerful man in the world, on a panorama programme where they edited two bits of footage together to completely change the meaning of what he said. And if you've not yet done so, go and have a look online. You can see it for yourself. So that's kind of like a thumbnail sketch of what happened. Have I missed anything out, Rebecca?
I think that's the main bulk of it. Yeah, you didn't really mention the Gaza stuff, but that was in there as well.
I did mention the Gaza stuff.
That's a huge amount of
it
coverage.
massively an issue for a lot of people. We know a couple of resignations have happened off the back of this. Just so everyone's fully in the picture, Director General Tim Davie's resigned. Also, the Chief Executive of BBC News, Deborah Turnus, has resigned. The chair, Samir Shah of the BBC, currently remains in place when we record this, so quite how he is still in place is beyond me. So Rebecca, when all of this started, let's talk about the Prescott dossier, if you like. When that first started to appear, what was your reaction?
I mean, the thing is, none of it is surprising, is it? For people who sort of have an issue with the licence fee, which was a huge amount of the population, 2/3 of the population regularly vote in polls to say we want to get rid of the licence fee. So it's not shocking. But just the effrontery, really, particularly around the Trump stuff. When you look at that clip, anybody who's done any video editing or any kind of media production at all would realise that is not acceptable. They have literally gone from one as if it was part of the same sentence without a breath to portray that is what he's saying, and that it was clearly to show that he's inciting hatred, inciting violence. Yeah. And that is not at all what he was saying. So, that was absolutely shocking to see that they could be so blatant, and that had gone through sort of all of these sort of checkpoints with the BBC. And then that they didn't apologise for this amount of time, that amongst themselves they'd had this kind of fight about what they were going to apologise for, and that delayed any kind of apology for
which really shows you, I think, a combination of the arrogance, but also how dysfunctional that organisation is. Callum, when all of this started to make the headlines, what was your initial reaction?
I think much the same. It's evidence, but it's not really a surprise that it's happened. I think the defence sort of along the lines of, it's actually very usual for news organisations to splice bits of speech together. It's like, sure, we might see it where you cut out a little bit of a sentence where a politician ums or ahs for the sake of brevity, but they took it from almost an hour after it and to completely change the meaning of what he was saying. You think, this is very obviously a biased slant that you've put on this to make the president of the US seem to be saying something he's not.
Incite violence, basically, which he didn't do, which is very clear. You make a really interesting point, Rebecca. I mean, again, having worked in TV and radio at the BBC, that Panorama programme will have had various producers and editors working on it who would have been aware of this. And yet, despite all of what you might call these checks and balances, that still got signed off, which... to me, is the bigger issue here, because it does suggest, doesn't it, that this bias is endemic. Yeah. And also makes me ask the question, well, if this was about Panorama, right, and it happens to be because of this whistleblower, Michael Prescott, that we know about it, how many other bits of editorial have been a little bit iffy? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, and as you said, that ties into this sort of the trans debate, doesn't it? Because so much of that hasn't come through. And so we just get to see the lengths that they will go to as an organisation that they think are acceptable. I think that within their sort of metropolitan elite dinner party set, they think that, everybody hates Trump, so we can say what we like. But he's he wasn't at that point, but the elected leader of our closest ally, a very important ally, and the BBC felt that they could portray him to be inciting violence, and that takes a real level of arrogance, at a corporate level, for them to believe they could get away with that. But as we've said, we see with the trans debate, with other woke issues that are complex and that the public is having a debate over, the BBC thinks it can sort of ride roughshod and just say and edit things in a way that it suits them. And we saw it first of all, I think, with Brexit. When the Brexit debate was happening, the BBC behaved in an absolutely abysmal way, portraying half of the population as these sort of rabid racists or old thick people, and it was just really diabolical. So this leaked memo just reiterates what everyone suspects about the BBC. Where do they go from here?
Well, we'll come on to that in a second. I mean, Callum, I'm interested. Do you think, and I've got a view, and I'll share it in a second, do you think the people who have been involved in the Trump editing, and indeed the other examples of bias, do you think it's conscience? Do you think they're doing it on purpose?
I think it's very likely. It was on Monday the 24th of November, the BBC chairman was in front of the DCMS committee and bragged that, when we put the episode out, we didn't get any complaints, as if the only thing that they're worried about is the fact they've been found out, not that they did it. And you think, because they don't think they've done anything wrong. It's not a case of, people underneath us have put out this documentary that has things in it that we didn't say. It's this likely goes quite a lot higher.
But there's a bigger issue with this, isn't there? Because the BBC preaches about its integrity, right? Which is why we should carry on funding it using this archaic funding method. They talk about their integrity in journalism, all right? And I would argue that there's a big chunk of people in this country who, if they see something on the BBC, go, well, that's obviously what happened. So if you were watching that Panorama programme, you would understandably go, oh, look, that's what Trump said, right? You wouldn't even cross your mind that somewhere along the line, there are a group of editors and producers who thought it was perfectly acceptable to join together two bits of speech almost an hour apart.
Well, it's that, and then, if you challenge the BBC, you get someone sort of that's not that politically involved. But as you said, we'll assume that, the BBC said one thing, you're saying a different thing.
Yeah.
I'll assume the BBC is correct and just completely discount what you're saying.
Do you think, Rebecca, it was intentional, or do you think it's subconscious bias?
I think that editing was absolutely intentional.
Right.
I mean, I do some editing work, and of course, you choose the bits that go with the narrative.
Yeah.
That's how you edit. You edit a storyline based on the audio of what's being said so that it makes sense. Unless you're going to sort of drop out of one bit, sort of go across to another bit of B-roll or something, and then come back, and then you're not. But they clearly spliced those two bits of words together to make it so that it made sense to the audience and to them. And that's, I think it's absolutely deliberate.
Where do you think that comes from? Is it? I mean, you alluded to it slightly a few moments ago, the idea that everyone hates Trump, so we're able to do this. Is it that simple, you think?
I think so. I think they have a general view from the sort of Londoner kind of mindset. I mean, I used to live in London, so I've seen both sides. I live in Kent now, which is very, very different. But that people within the M25 think that Trump is an absolute laughing stock. Nobody nobody cares if he is portrayed one way or the other, because we all know that he's toxic as anything. I think that is the sort of view at the BBC. So they feel like they can do what they want without any repercussions. And I think that they have felt that this story will just go away because it's Trump, and actually most people, aren't bothered. It's old news now, kind of thing. And they're also this side sort of thing where Trump is now going to sue the BBC.
Yeah.
They're kind of hoping that means that the public will feel sorry for the poor BBC because Trump's a bully. That's kind of the mindset, isn't it?
It's playing the victim card in some ways. Though I have there's something interesting about that, because I know a little bit about the British psyche, and I do think some people will go, hang on a second, don't bully this country. Do you know what I mean? They might have an issue with the BBC, but the fact that you have an American president effectively suing part of this country, there will be some people, I think, who might just go, I think that's unnecessary. Yes. Does that make sense?
Well, unfortunately as well, because it is taxpayer money,
Yeah.
it is ultimately our licence fees that will be paying for the BBC's very costly mistake. It's not as if Trump's going after a private company where if you don't want to have to fund the money, you can just not pay that. It's like, but I think there's a slight difference there because of the licence fee.
Is he right to sue?
I mean, they have defamed him, so I think maybe the damages are a little bit excessive, given that he ended up winning the next election.
Because the argument is, isn't it, that he's got to be able, if I understood it correctly, and I find it really fascinating, he's got to be able to prove that that's somehow damaged his reputation, or somehow, I mean, he won the election, right? So it doesn't matter, does it? So, I mean, I don't know, do you think he's right to sue?
It's really difficult, like I say, I think because it's licence fee payers' money at the end of the day, and we all know that the BBC is not going to cut back in order to pay that money. No. So they'll either just put the licence fee up more. Yeah. It will be the British taxpayer that ends up covering that cost, and that's what's deeply uncomfortable. Absolutely, Trump should have embarrassed them on a global scale as he has done, but I think the suing is uncomfortable because, as you say, in the British psyche, there'll be a lot of people that think, well, that
butt out.
Butt out, or we like to defend the underdog, and the BBC is in no way an underdog. No. But in this situation, it's
got some of those optics, though, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Do either of you listen to the Today programme on Radio 4?
I don't.
Do you listen to it at all?
Not unless
it's all right, you can admit to it.
Not unless I have to.
All right, so I do, only from the point of view that, whilst we're having to exist under this government ministers will always put the Today programme on Radio 4 as a priority, right? So that 10-minute past 8 interview is always worth a listen, because that's where Wes Streeting might pop up and pretend he's not trying to become the next leader of the Labour Party. That's why I listen to it. That's the only reason I listen to it. And I had it on the morning after that memo was given to the Telegraph. So it had been online for about 12 hours and was on the front page of the newspaper. And I urge anyone listening to go back, if you want to or are able to have a listen to it, because it was extraordinary. And it picks up on what you said, Rebecca. So what happened, and I'll do my best to do it justice in a fair way, you had literally between about 8 and 9 o'clock, all of these talking heads that the producers would have booked probably the night before and that morning, getting their reaction to what was in this leaked memo. all right? And not one of them addressed the allegations of bias. Very quickly, this narrative was developing, which is this is some kind of right-wing plot to take down the BBC, and they pointed to someone on their board. I think most of our listeners will know a guy called Robbie Gibb, was head of comms for Theresa May, wasn't he, I think? But also as an ex-BBC journalist going, well, he and Michael Prescott have cooked this up together to bring down the BBC. And it was extraordinary. Contributor after contributor made this point, and they didn't want to focus on the thing that us around this table would be going, hang on a second, you clearly doctored some footage here in order to change the meaning of it. Why are you not talking about it? And for me, that really summed up the problem the BBC has with something that's so obvious and so big. They're not even the elephant in the room, all right? Well, who doctored this footage? Why do you think it's acceptable? Who signed this off? None of that. It was all about, all of these right-wingers, Boris Johnson appointed this guy, Robbie Gibb, they've never liked the BBC. And for me, it just summed it up. They simply do not get it.
Absolutely. It's that sort of typical lightning rod strategy, isn't it? Where they go, look at this guy, to detract from what the main event is. And the BBC are brilliant at doing this kind of PR where they look after themselves, they circle the wagons. There's nothing to see here, business as usual. And to take that approach, and maybe they were just hoping that it would all blow over. And they just sort of go, oh, look, the nasty right winger, he did it all. And that they would get away with it. But that approach doesn't work anymore.
No.
And it hasn't worked really since those Brexit years, I think, with the BBC. I think when the BBC behaved in the way that they did around those who voted for Brexit, I think it made a lot of the country wake up, because actually most people aren't that polarised into left or right, really. The average person on the street, they just know that either they don't want to pay as much tax or some people want more. It's not that simple.
We're the shadows here because we're politically engaged, and I always make this point on our podcast, which is we're not normal. All right, if the phrase, Mrs. Jones in Clapham, right, doesn't left go, I'm a left winger, I'm a right winger. Majority of people just want to live their lives, not pay so much money in tax, and they want fairness, don't they? Sorry, you continue.
I think I've lost my train. No, but yes, I think that's the thing with the BBC is that it's tried this kind of like nasty right winger thing for well, at least since 2016. But it's not working anymore and you can see now the country is now largely supporting reform. So telling people they're nasty right wingers hasn't really worked for the BBC. It's kind of backfired.
I think it annoys the BBC that their opponents, normally people on the right, are not actually as nasty as they seem to make out, which is why they keep on having to doctor or very selectively edit things to try and make them, whether it's the trans stuff, whether it's Trump, whether it's Brexit, so they have to make up enemies, which is what they're doing again.
Exactly, and actually the vast majority of people who are gender critical, i.e. they have an issue with the trans ideology, are actually left-wing women, and I've met, a lot of them, a lot of them are former Labour supportive, people who are like outraged by what the Labour Party are doing, but also how the BBC are representing it.
Yeah. And you made a really good point earlier, which was it took them such a long time to start addressing this. I mean, I mentioned the Today programme the morning after. There was that flurry of all of this guff. It was just extraordinary, David Yellen, the former editor of The Sun, popping up, just going, the Conservatives will never like the BBC. It was extraordinary. Had all of that. And then almost silence from Tim Davie, the Director General, for a good few days before some very limp statement appeared, which was like, we're aware of this. Why do you think they don't take it seriously?
I think that they hope that it will blow over. They have such control over the news cycle. For many people, as they always talk about, because BBC Online News is free to look at, a lot of people will go to the BBC website and they will get their news from there. And therefore, what they put as the top story of the day is the top story of the day for a lot of people. And so they feel that they can control the news cycle. And it's only when it shows that they can't, when the likes of GB News or whatever keep pushing the story, and therefore it won't just fade away. That they feel that we're going to have to do something now.
Tim Davie, the Director General, has quit. I mean, he's still in the job, but he'll be leaving in a few months. Ditto Deborah Turnus, who's like the chief exec of BBC News. Were they right to resign, do you think?
I think they had to, but then I don't really see the point in replacing them with another person that thinks and acts in the exact same way, which their predecessors do, and I imagine their successors will.
Okay, well, let's get your thoughts on this. I mean, who do you want to see as the next DG of the BBC?
I think I've the same view there, is that it's just hard to know. It's going to be business as usual, whoever they appoint, because it's them that's appointing the next person. So, for me, it's all about sort of completely gutting the BBC and making it not have this kind of guaranteed source of income, which means that they are then accountable to those people who want to pay for them. So I don't know that when it comes to Director General, I think it's whoever they appoint, and I think they're going to struggle to find someone, but whoever they appoint is going to be pushing for the BBC to carry on as usual.
Do you think they really, after all of this, making worldwide headlines with the president of the USA threatening to sue the corporation, do you think they're still that tone deaf that they would just appoint someone else who's like Tim Davie Mark II, male or female? Do you think that would happen?
I think that's what they'll try. I cannot see that they're going to suddenly wake up and be like, you know what, we've got to change. And I always see them as very much like, I'm going to keep going on about Brexit, but I see them very much like the EU, that they're just completely belligerent and they won't change because they do not feel that they have to change. They've got this power and they're just like, we will just carry on. If they were to change, it would be miraculous. But I just can't.
Because there's an opportunity here, isn't there, with the charter renewal coming up at the end of 2027, isn't it, I think? And obviously they want to survive the BBC in some form and would want to keep the licence fee. Strategically, you could argue, well, actually, what we should do is appoint someone who's quite radical to show that we've listened and we've learned from our mistakes, blah, blah, blah. That's what I would do strategically. But you make a brilliant point, and you were nodding, Callum, when Rebecca said it. It's like the EU. It's just like they'll just carry. It's like the NHS as well. There's something going on there. Some synergies happening. BBC, NHS, and EU. Other organisations exist that don't just use 2 or 3 letters. But it's almost like this kind of like we'll just carry on. We'll do what we've always done. Do you think that's the case with the BBC?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you look at the failings that they've had. It's each time they have an opportunity to perhaps change the way that they do things, and each time they just further embed in to think that, well, we've got this licence fee protection. We've got a government that actually quite likes a licence fee at the moment, quite likes the BBC because they provide us a lot of coverage. So, well, they probably feel quite safe that they're going to get that renewed. Yeah,
though Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, has been a little bit spiky in the last several weeks. I mean, you could argue she's had to be, I suppose. I mean, do you think ultimately, though, the issue, Rebecca, is, Labour will always go into bat for the BBC regardless?
I think so, but also the frustration was always there with the Conservatives as well, that they didn't do anything, and they had to do, a huge majority, and they did absolutely nothing with it, with things like challenging the licence fee. They certainly should have done. But there is huge change, isn't there, in the political sphere, and who knows what a reform government would do if that does happen. The Labour government aren't really going to do anything. As you say, Lisa Nandy she speaks quite
She's
well
been punchy,
on
hasn't
this,
she?
and it's reassuring for her to say that only thing she's ruled out is general taxation, because that obviously would be horrible for the British public to then have to be forced to pay for this, because there are millions of people that don't pay for the BBC TV licence because they don't watch any live broadcast or BBC iPlayer, so they're doing it perfectly legally, and as long as you don't do that, you don't have to pay for it. But those people would then be drawn back into funding it, so there would be absolute outrage if that happened. So it's good that she's ruled that out, but she kind of hasn't really come up with any other answers. And it can't carry on business as usual, because at the moment it's like the second biggest type of prosecution straight after sort of driving offences is BBC non-payment of the BBC TV licence. And that's outrageous, particularly given that 74% of those who are prosecuted are women. There's clearly something going wrong there.
That's always bandied around. And if I've understood it correctly, is it because people get fined for not having a licence and they don't pay the fine, and that's when they can end up in prison? That's the process, isn't it?
It's right, but the reason it's mainly women is because it's attached to the household, not to the person. So it's whoever answers the door, and women are, because of having kids and what have you, they're more likely to be at home. They're more likely to open the door at the time when they're coming around, which is really unfair. It's the wife that gets prosecuted because she's at home with the kids. Don't
answer the door.
Exactly.
It's bizarre. Well, we'll spend a few minutes before we wrap this one up talking about what you think the future should look like for the BBC, both of you, and how it could or should be funded. But just given what we've spoken about and this leak that appeared in the Telegraph, and we know that it triggered A lot of BBC senior managers going in front of the Media Select Committee a couple of weeks ago, where, I don't think we learned a great deal, really. They dug in quite hard, the BBC. How much damage do you think this has done the corporation?
I think for people, it was obviously so egregious. I think many people that are not politically active, the examples you gave, will now be very aware of this. They probably dislike Trump, but they will be wondering why a national broadcaster that's supposedly meant to be impartial is making such egregious standards. I would hope that it shifts the dial a little bit.
Yeah. Rebecca, how much damage do you think has been done here?
I think they've kind of really damaged their own argument, really. I think because, they've always said that they've got this soft power, and that's sort of an argument for keeping the BBC going, and that's really important. And they've got this global audience. And they probably haven't impacted the UK audience as much. As we said, young people aren't paying for the BBC anyway. Older people are switching off in their droves. And it's those sort of middle people that probably don't really like Trump that much anyway, but might be thinking, that's a bit odd what's going on there. But it's that wider global scale. So they've kind of taken away this argument that they've got for carrying on with the TV licence, because they're a laughing stock on the global scale now. They're on the global platform now.
Yeah.
So, they've kind of done in their own knees.
Let's talk about alternative funding methods. I'm a fan of public service broadcasting. I think there's a role for it. And I'll give you an example. As someone who's worked for the BBC and the commercial sector, fully behind the commercial sector, you make programmes, radio or TV, that get listeners, right? Because ultimately you're there to make money. So, that's why if you tune into Capital FM, you're going to hear Taylor Swift pretty much every hour. And that's the right thing to do because kids want to hear pop music and Taylor Swift is the best in the business. Okay. The BBC shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff because it's provided by the commercial sector. The BBC, in my world, should be making programmes featuring brass band music, right? Because there are people in this country who enjoy brass band music, but the commercial sector would never touch it with a barge pole because there's not enough people who like it to make money, right? So that's where I come from. Where I struggle a little bit is whether or not, given my argument of public service broadcasting, that should be funded with a grant from government, or it's done, the BBC becomes a 100% subscription service, or maybe it's a hybrid of the two. I don't know. But certainly I think when we come to public service broadcasting, that there is a place for it. But as I say, I'm torn about how it's funded. And I certainly think, and I've noticed this when I work for the BBC, what happens in London and in Manchester, the two main hubs, very different from what's in the regions. Yeah. If you go to a newsroom in Middlesbrough, all right, you'll find it's not metropolitan elite bias. Anyone who worked at BBC Tees would have told you the Brexit was going to happen. Yes. You know what I mean? So it's that simple. But the regions, as commercial radio is pulled back from doing local news because there's not much money in it, and understandably so, there's an argument for the BBC to do that. However, if you talk to local newspaper editors, I know quite a few, they go, well, no, because they're taking away our business model. So I'm a little bit torn regarding how it should look in the future, but I don't think the licence fee is the answer. So let's scrap it. What do you think?
I was watching last night one of the new BBC programmes that's a rehash of an old one called Civilizations, which Kenneth Clarke did the first one 2030, probably more than that now, probably 40 years ago. One of the best documentary series that BBC ever produced. The new one is awful. They got Alistair Campbell along to talk about ancient Egypt.
What?
So I don't know...
What's his connection to ancient Egypt?
Supposedly, we all have sort of repeating political struggles that he was uniquely qualified to talk about with ancient Egypt. Right. And I think this is a sort of protection that the BBC has when it's not actually competing.
So Blair's spin doctor was invited to appear on a programme to talk about ancient Egypt?
Yes, he was doing some PR recovery for Ptolemy or something, I assume.
Wow.
But this is a sort of standard of programming that the BBC is putting out now, and there's all of the political problems with it, but a massive problem is that just the quality of output that they have is shockingly awful compared to where it used to be. And the fact that they have so many of their old programmes on the iPlayer, you can see it yourself by just watching a remake of a new remake of something they do. And I think because they have the licence fee, they're able to protect themselves to carry on making subpar things. If Netflix put something out that was so awful, I imagine they'd lose quite a lot of subscriptions. So having it move towards that, of having an actual subscription model, I hope would actually improve the BBC.
So that's the TPA's position?
Yes, scrap the licence fee.
Scrap the licence fee.
Make it compete.
And is that your position as a young geezer compared to this middle-aged bloke?
It still is, yeah.
Excellent. All right. Rebecca, what's the answer?
I agree, and in fact, I think what's coming down the line is young people, but even I'm obviously middle aged, but the thing is, people are listening to podcasts, they're listening to content that they have selected when they have selected it. They're not listening to broadcast material anymore, and so I think that we're used to this model now of. Even with things like the ITV Online and Channel 4, where you can have it being funded by advertising, or if you don't want to watch the adverts, you pay a small subscription fee and then you don't have to watch the adverts. And everybody's used to having that now. They've got all of these different subscriptions, and whether the BBC fits into that mix or not is up to the BBC. But as you say, if they continue making awful programmes, then people are just going to keep switching off.
Yeah. And you've got a teenage daughter. I've got
Yes.
a daughter who's in her early 20s. My daughter, Spotify Premium is a classic example of that. She uses Spotify. She doesn't want to hear the adverts.
Yeah.
So I think it's 19 quid a month or £17 a month to avoid the adverts. And I think that's what those generations are used to doing. And they want that choice, don't they?
Absolutely, they don't. The thought of sort of sitting down and waiting for something to come on TV is just sort of like, why? I'll just watch it on catch up, or I'll just watch something that I actually want to watch at a time when I want to watch it. And we're seeing young people just don't get TV licenses. I mean, also because a lot of them are still living at home because they can't afford to, get their own place as well. Yeah. But when they go away to university, they don't have to have a TV license as long as they don't watch it whilst it's plugged into the wall. Yeah. So there's all these different reasons why young people haven't got TV licenses, and they're very unlikely to ever. And
I think to roll into that, unless you were particularly besotted with Mr. Tumble when you were a toddler or whatever, our kids haven't grown up with maybe the. I use the word respect because I can't think of a better word. The respect or acknowledgement of the BBC that maybe when we were their age existed. Do you know what I mean? Because this might be a bit of a shock, Callum, but I remember certainly when there were only ever 3 TV channels. BBC One, BBC Two and ITV. So the BBC was massively dominant and did have a massive space to occupy in the British psyche. And now we're not in that position.
No, we're told by supporters of the BBC that it's still got the sort of command that it had in the past. It's still got all the integrity it had in the past. So I'd say, well, brilliant. It should be able to compete by itself then, shouldn't it? But, that's I imagine they'd also get quite fearful of that because I think really they know it's not what it once was.
Yeah, I think you're right. Rebecca, final word to you. Defund the BBC, still very much in existence, doing great work. What do people need to know?
People need to know that you don't have to pay for the BBC, and the legal way that you can be without a TV licence is by not watching any live broadcast TV. Now, that's where it gets confusing, as people don't know what live broadcast TV means. Is if it is broadcast to a TV schedule, on any channel from anywhere in the world, actually, you would have to have a TV licence, or if you watch BBC iPlayer. So if you're watching catch up, or on demand, if you're deciding when to watch it, as long as it's not BBC iPlayer, you're okay. But things like Sky News on YouTube, for example, if it's on YouTube but it's broadcast at the same time as the live TV channel, you still need to have a licence, so you have to be careful of that. So you have to know what you can't watch. It's anything that's on a live broadcast schedule, as long as you're not watching that, or if you're watching YouTubers and they can live stream because it's not a TV channel, then you're okay. So it's really just getting to terms what it is that you can legally watch without a TV licence, and then you just go ahead and just don't get a TV licence. They will keep bombarding you with letters, but as long as you know your stuff, then you're okay.
Yeah, and last time I looked at your website, you explained this brilliantly. Yes. So where's the website again?
It's defundbbc.uk.
Lovely. Rebecca, thank you for coming in. Good to see you again. Callum, thank you for joining us from the Taxpayers Alliance. I've been Duncan Barkes. Thank you for listening. Just a reminder, we have an archive that goes back many, many months, featuring all kinds of episodes, talking to fascinating people. Check out this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. If you want to say hello or suggest a guest for a future episode, the email address is podcast@taxpayersalliance.com. Thank you for listening.